So, welcome once again to a series of discussions that we as Summit are hosting with partners in the industry, and really to assist leaders to think differently, future proof their business, and focusing on the themes of communication and innovation. So, a special welcome to my guest today, as you can see, drum roll please. And our guest is Larisha Naidoo. So, Larisha takes the constant search for business solutions for sustainability and fighting poverty very much to heart and views on entrepreneurship as a worthwhile course for development in South Africa. At the helm of Zimele, Anglo America's enterprise supply and youth development program, she's leading the organization to take enterprise development in Anglo Americans' host communities to another level. And I can say that because I've been involved in it. So definitely an activist through and through. She has a strong aspiration to fight poverty, and through her work, will continue work on solutions that create positive socio-economic development. So Larisha, thanks for joining us on the discussion today.
Thanks, Matt, for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, awesome. I know these intros are always quite strange because you never think of yourself in that particular light. So from your perspective, is that how you see yourself?
Absolutely. It's a passion of mine to fight poverty and sort of work towards how we improve, the standard of living, especially from a South African context. So definitely, I have a passion towards that. As much as I'm a chartered accountant, you can see and I think I have something in common with you. We move towards the purpose of making our country a better place.
Absolutely. So, I mean, what we normally just in these discussions, we kind of highlight some key takeaways we want to get out of this. So from both you and our perspective, we can keep on track. I know sometimes I like to ramble off a little bit, so it makes me keep very focused. So, today what we really want to look at is, working closely with communities for businesses to effectively thrive into the future. So, on that particular point, Larisha, so, South Africa is at this sort of precarious point of these, disheartened youth experience about, depending on what metrics you use, but if you look particularly in the youth space, roughly about 60% unemployment. Obviously, we all know this in South Africa, it's not sustainable, and obviously, will eventually lead to, and has in many ways led to, crises sort of popping up around the country. And I guess I don't really want to focus too much on that because everyone knows about that. I really want to focus on, how do we engage with communities to create sustainable operations that lead to effectively, as best as possible, addressing this critical issue in respect of youth unemployment that we have in the country. And I know, obviously, not only within your current position, but in respect to many initiatives that you've been involved in, this is sort of something that you've very much focused on. So, I mean, in saying that, so from your perspective, how do you believe that we can build sustainable strategies to uplift youth in the communities that they belong in and serve in essence?
Yes, thanks, Matt, for the question. And you and I have been working very closely on what sustainability means and how we actually take youth through a journey of learning and earning. Because when we look at developing youth, it's not just about upskilling an individual with the skill that's random. I think it's a very deliberate act, and it has to be linked to something economic. What do I mean by that? When we embark on a journey with partners, we look for partners that look at an holistic view, which says, who would be interested from a youth perspective to learn a particular skill, because it shouldn't be imposed on an individual. But coupled to that, when they show the interest in that skill, there must definitely be a demand for that job. And when we look at, when we were embarking on this journey with Summit, a big conversation was, firstly, to work together, we need to understand the community challenges. To understand the community challenges, we need to go out there and start a dialogue with young people. And some of the things that you and I were talking about at that point was sustainability around how do we get a person from one place to the other, because that's what the job requires, and do they have adequate resources to be able to get that done. If we look at transportation costs, we know that individuals out in rural South Africa have 3 to 4 generational poverty, sitting with them. And it's some of the simple things that we would take for granted, like board and lodge, transportation, all of that is not that simple for someone who's earning a minimum wage. So when we talk about strategies around young people, we need to look at the relevance of the skill, the ability to overcome the challenges so that that individual can be placed into the job and that that job actually exists. And if those elements are not tying up together, we really won't get that right, and we won't make an impact in the community that we would like to see. So it's very, very important that we do that. You know, when working with you, tourism is a very relevant industry that's growing at a certain speed pre-COVID-19. And excited to work with this partnership to embark on that sustainable economic development. So, I mean, I'll turn to you to get some of your thoughts or comments. Yeah.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, you know, one of the things, talking, I guess, holistically about something that I've always envisioned, and maybe as someone in the skills sector, I should probably not say this out loud for sake of being crucified. But I've always envisioned sort of more metrics aligned with what I was, or what we have been able to embark upon, and sort of the initial conversations, and to be very specific about that. I mean, one of the metrics, you know, we often talk about, you and I, is cost per job. You know,
Yes.
and for me, that's, you know, being in this, you know, you get different arrays of different providers, whatever the case may be, but something that I think, you know, various, whether skills providers or any other social development providers, I think, you know, that's something that is a metric that is not many people take on or take up. And, you
Yes.
know, and in respect of your cost per job, I mean, to be explicit about that is, you know, and at the end of the day, how much does it cost to get someone sustainably employed? You know, and
Yes.
so, and you know, you've obviously got your internal targets, and the reality of that is that if you train a host of people or upskill a host of people, and they aren't or can't find employment, of course your cost per job increases. But if you're
Yes.
able to get as much of those individuals that are upskilled into obviously specific roles and sustainable roles, then of course your cost per job then decreases. And that's essentially, you know, from your perspective, the targets that you put in place. But most importantly, you know, I'm a lover of metrics, but as many people who've watched these know, but most importantly, I mean, what a metric should be doing is driving the behavior that you want to reward or incentivize, and or both on your perspective and my perspective, because at the end of the day, you know, if you're looking to upskill individuals, like you said, it's got to be focused on, well, how do we get those individuals employed? And it takes a little bit more thought. It's difficult. I mean, if it was simple, I think you know, everyone would be doing it, and we wouldn't have an unemployment problem in our country. So, you know, it is difficult because you got to, like we said, you got to start thinking about the whole value chain. So both you and I have got to think a little bit differently, because you got to say, okay, well, what type of sectors, or not even necessarily sectors, but what type of skill sets currently do we know that there is a demand for, and then we future forecast a demand for? You know, we've a small example outside beyond what we've been engaged with, but like as we've discussed previously, is if you look at the multimedia space, and if you look at, for example, streaming services, the growth in streaming services globally, and those streaming services to either remain relevant in their particular market, or to be successful globally, they need to be producing their own content. And they have to turn into production houses. And in respect of that, they need animators, they need film crews. And so this growth in, so traditionally you would have sort of, a few large scale production houses controlling the content for the world, in essence. Everyone knows Friends, everyone knows Cheers to a less than larger degree. And those were really, that was how the world worked then. Now with the shift towards localized content, original content, it's the demand for content has grown and is not as, if I could call it, kind of one tier, fits all kind of. It's very specialized, and that has led to a growth in sectors localized. For example, if we think in our country, Showmax and the original content on Showmax, a need to develop more content, and thus a need for more people to step into those roles of developing content in various formats, like I said, animation, production, film production, acting, whatever the case may be. But the point is to say, okay, well, looking at that as a global and local trend, then you need to start then to work backwards and say, okay, well, how would we look at something in respect of skilling people in that area? Then once we've thought about that, then how do we get them to partake in some sort of practical work experience that has a very high rate or high probability of being employed? And for those people who aren't employed off that type of intervention, what is the next step for them? Is there an opportunity for them to access some specific platform? Is there an opportunity where, us as a team have put together relationships with different organizations in the content housing space that they will take on X amount of individuals for a set internship or period of time? So I think, it's a lot more difficult at the end of the day, and it requires thinking through the value chain a lot more versus taking your if you're the person who's saying, okay, I need you to do this, provide this particular skill, and that's sort of where your role falls. And then I'm the individual who comes in and looks at it in my silo and say, okay, well, I'm just going to provide this skill set. I'm not really going to worry about what occurs after I've done in respect of that intervention. And that's sometimes, and then you might have gotten someone else who was going to focus on some aspect of taking these learners and, placing them in potential internships, proper placements, whatever the case may be. So, you've got to remove those little silos, and you've actually got to look at it from a holistic perspective. And, fitting into our theme is not only innovation, but really communication, to making sure, because you can bring in other people to assist on each specific leg or each silo, but what you need to do is reduce the barriers between communication for the silos. So everyone knows and everyone's aligned in respect of one metric, like we spoke about, the cost per job. So, I mean, from me, the learnings from engaging with you in respect of that has been, it aligns everyone in the right direction. We know where we're heading because of that one metric. So, I mean, for me, that's definitely something that I feel is works within community-based projects. And I think it should be kind of like if I could take one thing away or put forward one thing from my side in this conversation, is to look at the cost per job metric. I think is critical. I mean, from your perspective, just so I can bounce it back to you, I mean, what drove you towards that metric? I mean, I mean, obviously I'm sure it was to align those behaviors, but was it to get you to think a little bit more deeply?
Yes, thanks, Matt. I think from our side, definitely it is a metric that helps us firstly understand what the cost is in order to get someone to take on a job, number one, and also then to benchmark that across globally to see how we're faring. Now, we also, as you know, with our discussions, we also know that there's multiple levels of the cost per job depending on what you're trying to upskill the individual on, and that there would be something that you would bring on various partners. Now some of the points that we would talk about around that would be, as much as the cost per job is very important, what quality of job is that? And is that job giving an individual the ability to then be able to move further up with their own strength and to stand on their own 2 feet, to be able to pave, or should I say carve out a career that they can grow and fall into. And that's some of the things that you and I have been discussing. But over and above that, that cost per job also gives you the opportunity to understand how, if or how there is a need to bring on further partners, or to get other partners to support the societal challenge that we're experiencing or facing right now, which exponentially increases in the middle of this pandemic, which is around unemployment. Because you and I both know, whilst you may get someone from rural South Africa into a potential job, to get them sustainably into their job, to keep that job, they need a house, because it's not close to where they stay. And then secondly, they will need transport costs and all other costs to keep their living standard to an acceptable level. So those are all the things that help us to build on and direct our funds towards the right elements that support that young person or that individual to actually keep sustainably in that role and move up. So that's some of the elements that I would bring in, which would be the practical side of when you actually engage partners and look at things, which you'd know is some of the things that you and I discuss. And also, I think apart from that, it's important that whilst we skill people and use money to upskill individuals, if we want the impact to be at the levels we want to see someone's life improve, then we've got to link it responsibly to who are the other partners that come in that would like to either allow that individual to learn further on a job, or to earn and learn while carrying out activities within that company, and hopefully build their own networks with the various employers to be able to climb up to different roles or actually sustain the current role. So, and it's definitely not it takes multiple parties to be able to do that, especially under the tough economic circumstances that we're facing from a South African context.
No, thank you for that.
Over to you.
Yeah. So from my perspective, I think, kind of bringing it back to, like we've discussed, working with our communities to ensure that, businesses can thrive into the future, and focusing on the communication side of things. And something we had a bit of a quick chat before this particular event, and it was really about, how, we all of us watching the news and kind of looking at the different levels of lockdown that we're in, and understanding what news comes at us and how people are communicating with us. So within the Zamelia framework and within the communities that you operate in this particular time, what are the critical things that you're doing from a communication perspective that you think is probably important to impart with our current individuals on the event, and and just share with them some key takeaways from that perspective?
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Matt. So Anglo American Zamelia, has embarked on a development strategy to upskill communities in and around where Anglo American operates, and that's mostly in rural South Africa, ranging from Limpopo to the eMalahleni areas, the Northern Cape, etc. And a lot of the information that we've got to share with our communities has to be done effectively, and we've also got to control the ability to share that valid information. So a big part of what our campaign has been around is to say, look, as much as we know that there's a strain on individuals and companies with regards to paying their daily activity, their daily expenses, because very, very firm and tough lockdown economically, and even just the movement of people in society. So some of the things that we have done is communicated, and not only communicated, but actioned out a 3-month holiday payment with an interest-free rate on the individuals that have loans with Anglo American Zamele. We've managed to do that very robustly through the communication streams of APSA and Anglo American. Over and above that, with partners like yourself and our big partner called TechnoServe, we're also looking at how do we communicate digitally in an environment where we're not able to have face-to-face meetings as freely as we would like to. We understand that that has to be done on digital platforms, whether that's cheaper on a WhatsApp platform for now for one-on-one engagements, using Teams or Zoom, whatever form of activity. It supports an entrepreneur or a young person to gauge access to a business advisor, or just have an opportunity to discuss some of their day-to-day challenges. We're also doing that. We've also tailored our programs to assist with the digital learning platforms. I'm sure you're going to talk a little bit about some of the work that Summit is doing currently, but we are looking at amending our current modules to look at cash preservation, cost effectiveness, the ability to digitize that particular company, and really around the call for funding. Funding is the single biggest issue right now. We've done a survey that reached out to 200 SMMEs who are on our program, and their two biggest issues. One is a cash flow issue, and it's an immediate issue. It's not even a 60 or 90 day, it's a 30-day issue, because we would know from a South African context, people don't have that ability to save because of the issues around their income and sustaining that income on a monthly basis. And over and above that, it's just the loss of income. The fact that there's force majeure, that there's no activity economically that has an impact on today's living standard. So we would work with that SMME on how do they latch onto some of the COVID relief funding, whether it's from South Africa Future Trust, whether it's the UIF, whether it's the tax relief system that is available. And easier said than done. There's a lot of that have to pull together in order to get that done. So those are some of the things that we're currently working on with our SMMEs and young people to be able to get some of the COVID special relief, whether in the form of funding or grants, is currently what we're doing at the moment.
Awesome. Well, no, thanks for that. And I think, a couple of sort of takeaways from our perspective in respect of, how you're communicating, what tools are you using to communicate. I think I was speaking yesterday with sort of well-known strategist, and I was internally battling. I was having a chat with him, and I was battling internally with in my own side, saying, just I'm worried a little bit at the moment because my strategy is like a little bit. It's a little bit like it's got so many heads. It's like a hydra. It's not like this. Not the ultra high definition strategy that you've been taught about or kind of professed about and meant to follow from a leadership perspective. It's kind of like he called it the Graham Motley kind of strategy from the 80s, and what I mean by that is really people are, what's the best way to communicate? What is the best tool to communicate with? What are the top 5 tools? What are the top 10? And sort of relating it back to the point and the strategy and it's really that, what works. You're going to have to follow a different approach with different subsectors of either business units, companies. What is working? Is WhatsApp working? Is it working effectively in respect of community communication due to the more cost-effective rates of WhatsApp bundles? And is it more cost-effective than to send the information, the forms, etc., via WhatsApp? or you're in an environment where Teams seems to be the most effective communication because people are utilizing it more, or they're gravitating towards Slack, or they're gravitating towards just good old fashioned phone calls. The point is that I think we mustn't be too focused on what is the 100% correct tool, but more focused around, well, how do we communicate effectively and rapidly? Because with uncertainty, it's really about that, just quick communication, constant communication, whether it's a touch base here or there, or just a message, or whatever the case would be, just so people know where they are, or what they need to do, or what is outstanding, kind of those elements. Because it's when you're not able to go and sit in front of someone and hash those things out quickly, that's where it's critical to communicate more effectively in sort of quicker and shorter time periods. So yeah, I think for me, that's definitely one of the big takeaways I'm taking from you, is that don't be too phased in respect of what mechanism you're using. And if you're not using the latest and greatest and communication tool or platform out there, sure, then don't worry, as long as whatever tool that you're using, it's working, and you are getting the feedback that you need.
Yes. And I think that's so critical what you just said. I couldn't, absolutely, I'm grateful that it came out that way. But I think what's also something that's coming out very critical is the fact that data costs are high, and that could have an impact on individuals that can't afford it, and definitely has an impact. So I think if there's ever anything we should be solving for, which is the conversations you and I have quite often, is how do we work with multiple partners that allow communities, individuals, gather or gain access to data, to be able to allow them to be digital, because that's the biggest way of us not leaving our communities behind. As we move into a very high-paced digital economy environment, we really need to put our heads together on how we overcome those current challenges that stop or inhibit effective communication and innovation for digitization.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with you. Data for within a community setting and for the large part of South Africa is a challenge. And that's really why from our conversation, our focus has always been, on the upskilling side of things. You've got to reduce, as anything in life, you've got to reduce the barriers to entry. And, from our perspective and respect of, how we deliver our approach, which is fine. It's just one way we realize this problem is sort of it is a data-free environment for the customer at the end of the day. And from a business perspective, it makes sense. You've got to use your power as a business, whatever power it may be, some small, some great, depending on your size, I understand, but to negotiate with the various providers. And there's great providers out there. I've worked with all of the all the network providers, currently doing a lot with Vodacom. But the point being is that, as a business, if you're delivering these services and you are in social entrepreneurship enterprise environments, you need to find a way to reduce those costs, those data costs, build them into your cost of sale. And so you've got to squeeze the network providers a bit, because you need to ensure that you're not paying the retail rates. And you've got to build that in, because at the end of the day, your consumer, in our case, this is youth who need to upskill themselves. That's the barrier. There's a hunger, there's a thirst to learn, there's an appetite to gain new skill sets. They want to go into jobs, they just don't know how to do it. How do I get there? What do I do? Where must I go? What job areas must I apply for? And that's really sort of the role of us to provide that. But the point is, you've got to get over that first hurdle. And it's really around that, whatever that hurdle is, and whatever business it may be. But in our particular case, and what we're talking about, it is that. And if you just got to, solve that problem. And yes, it's maybe not a simple problem, but there's a very logical way in which to address it. Then you can start really empowering individuals out there. So yeah, but
it's quite, Yeah, and Matt, it's quite interesting that you talk about solving for the problem, because I think that's the critical thing. We have to understand what the problem is and solve for the right problem. Because you can solve for many things, and if you solve for the wrong thing, then you end up losing the impact that you require. So I think
Absolutely.
one of the biggest takeaways I take out of the leadership and the conversations that we have from Anglo-American Zamele, and even in fact with yourself as a partner, we always make sure we understand the problem, and is that the real problem that we should be solving for in order to create the impact that we want.
Well, I think that's a great note to leave the conversation on. So, in saying that, I just want to thank you, Larisha, for your time. As always, massively enjoyable, and have a great day further.
Me on this talk, and look forward to others. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks so much.